Welcome to Chills with Chas. Tonight we will be continuing our stories in the Haunted Heartland series. I'll be reading the Telltale Hand. Let's get into it. Each city in America has its tales of heroic firefighters, public servants, whose lives are often sacrificed to protect the public they serve. Chicago is no different. The files of the Chicago Fire Department are filled with the names of those who have died in the line of duty, and of the fire which had claimed them. Of course, every American schoolchild knows of Miss O'Leary and her errant, lantern-kicking cow, whose actions triggered the conflagration which nearly destroyed the city. But one of the strangest cases in Chicago fire history did not concern a particularly spectacular or long-remembered fire. Although there was a tragic loss of 10 lives, including 8 firemen, in the events which unfolded after the fire, made the story chilling. Francis X. Levy, Frank to his fellow firefighters, seemed melancholy, occupied, as he raised the soapy rag to to clean the winter's dirt from another window in the firehouse at 13th and Oakley. It was Good Friday, April 18th, 1924. Levy was scheduled to leave that day and Easter, according to the recently posted work schedule. Levy was a 13-year veteran of the fire force. Well, not fire force, sorry. Of the force, dedicated to his profession, but disturbed by being away from his wife Mary and young children, June and Frank. They would understand, of course, but that didn't assuage Levy's gloom as he struggled to concentrate on cleaning the windows in the firehouse. The cold winter and the late spring had taken its toll on the spirits of the men at Engine Company 107 and Truck Company 12. They were thankful that on this day they could leave the large red door of the firehouse open as they went about spring cleaning. Levy's friend, Edward McKift, was concerned about his comrade's dour expression. He walked over to Levy. "Was there a problem?" he asked. Levy's shoulders sagged. "This is my last day at the fire department," he replied. The soapy palm of his hand rested on the window glass, while he continued to wipe at the window with the wet rag in the other hand. Sorry, my hair is... Anyway. McKivitt was surprised. Earlier that morning, Levy seemed happy and content, talking about his future plans, whether it was working on the Easter holiday or concerned about a big fire spreading in the Union stockyards. McKevitt, sorry, I am not sure how to pronounce his name. McKevitt didn't show. For several hours, a ticket, or a ticker, hold on, for several hours. A ticker tape type device, the Big Joker, it was termed, had been rat-a-tat-tatting messages to the company about the 4-alarm stockyard blaze. The machine was the firehouse's link with other firehouses. The stockyard's fire was extremely serious. Levy's company was far enough away not to have been called, but if the fire grew any worse, they might have to respond. And worse yet, if a blaze erupted in another part of the city, Levy's company might not be able to count on backup support because of the large number of units already fighting the stockyard blaze. Suddenly, the Big Joker clicked out a message from Alarm Box 372, nearly 2 miles across the city. Several minutes later, Engine Company 107 and Truck Company 12 were ordered to report to the fire at Curran Hall, an imposing 4-story brick and stone edifice southwest of the loop. Frank Levy, Edward McKibben, and their fellow firefighters clambered aboard the pumper and truck for the Halloween ride through congested streets of the fire. There were few traffic lights in 1924. Intersections were scenes of impossible congestion. Streetcars, horse-drawn wagons, automobiles, and pedestrians all vied for the right of way. Screaming fire engines left a trail of bewildered citizenry and frightened horses. Curran Hall was engulfed in flame. The building housed a number of small businesses. The heaviest smoke seemed to be pouring from the upper floors. Truck 12's crew was ordered onto the roof to chop a hole to ventilate the upper floors. Firefighters could then reach the center of the fire. Frank Levy and the men of Engine 107 were told to make their way to the second floor on their hands and knees. The men groped their way up to the stairway through the choking smoke. There were no oxygen masks in those days. The men coughed and vomited all the way. Once they reached the second floor, the men had to take turns going out into the fire escape for fresh air. The minutes passed slowly. It seemed the firefighters were gaining the advantage over the flame. Suddenly a cry rang out. "Get out! Get out!" Supervisors on the ground saw that the men inside could not. The outside wall was crumbling. Levy and the others scrambled to the fire escapes and started down, but it was too late. The wall caved in with a sickening crack, like a giant roll of thunder. Hoses spit, sending streams of water exploding onto all directions. Ladders snapped in two like so many matchsticks, and firefighting equipment was buried under an avalanche of brick and mortar. And the frantic firefighters making their way to safety disappeared under the lethal shower of building materials. Frank Levy never had a chance. He was only part way down the fire escape when the wall collapsed. Hours later, the bodies of 8 firefighters were pulled from the rubble. While almost all the firemen victims were battered beyond recognition, The face of Frank Levy was the only one recognizable among the fatalities. The next day, Holy Saturday, Edward McKibben slumped into his chair as he tried to explain to his fellow firefighters what had happened the day before. It was not easy. 8 of his cohorts were dead. 20 other firefighters were injured, 2 critically, and yet McKevitt found himself the most troubled by Frank Levy's premonition of death. This is my last day of the fire department. Oh. And McKevitt glanced around the fire station, trying to understand the senseless event. His gaze rested on the window Levy had been washing the day before. His eyes focused on what seemed to be a blemish on the window. He rose and looked closely at it. The unmistakable outline of a man's hand. Frank Levy's hand. McKevitt clearly remembered Levy resting his palm against it as he wiped the window less than 24 hours earlier. "My God, it's Levy's hand," McKevitt muttered, was to himself. The man who had listened to McKevitt gathered around the strange impression. McKevitt told him of how he had seen Levy place his left hand in that very spot only the day before. The image which remained on the glass was that of a left hand, its fingerprints outstretched, just the type of mark that the world had made by a hand drenched in water and soapy suds. McKevitt rubbed at the window with a sponge from the bucket Levy had been using. The mark would not go away. The harder McKevitt wiped, the more obvious it became that Levy's handprint was not going away. Other men tried to wipe it off. They all failed. Ammonia, strong soaps, and even a razor blade failed to dislodge the image. One fireman went outside, thinking that the print was not on the inside of the window. His intense scrubbing was futile. By early the following week, the story of the firehouse at 13th and Oakley and its mysterious handprint had spread through the city, fueled by several newspaper stories. Soon other firefighters, newspapers, reporters, neighbors, and curious seekers showed up at the station's big red door for a look at Levy's handprint. An expert from the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company of manufacturers of windows was called in to solve the problem. He used a special, highly reliable chemical compound to clean the window, but Levy's handprint remained. A city official compared a copy of Levy's thumbprint to the print mark on the window. He said that they matched. As the weeks and months passed, a steady stream of the curious continued to show up at the fire station. Firefighters regularly washed the windows, including Levy's handprint, knowing full well that the image had not gone away. Suggestions were periodically made to replace the glass, but the firefighters usually objected, saying it wasn't right to tamper with the unknown. Over the years, the firehouse at 13th and Oakley saw dozens of firefighters stay within its walls and then go on to another assignments. Levy's handprint always remained. It was the custom for old firemen to tell the story of Frank Levy to the new firemen. Newspaper reporters occasionally resurrected the oddity, bringing a new horde of curious seekers. Curiously, Frank Levy's widow Mary and his children never came to look at the handprint, even though Frank Jr. followed in his dad's footsteps and became a fireman on April 18, 1945, the 21st anniversary of his father's death. Did the window pane actually contain Levy's ghostly handprint, or was the image a defect in the glass, which, when viewed from certain angles, resembled the man's hand? It is impossible to answer these questions today. However, there is no evidence to suggest that the defect was ever noticed until after Frank Levy's tragic death. Some firemen were convinced the print was supernatural. Others suggested that Levy's frightening premonition of death caused a bodily chemical to mix with his perspiration, causing the indelible stain. No one has ever successfully explained what caused the grim legacy of a dead fireman. And what happened to the window with Frank Levy's handprint? This is perhaps strangest of all. On April 18th, 1944, 20 years to the date on which Levy died, a newspaper boy threw a rolled-up newspaper towards the firehouse. The missile struck Levy's window, shattering it into thousands of pieces. Well, that's the story for now. Thank you for listening. See you next time.